All right, welcome back, everyone. So some big stories to go into tonight. You might remember these defund the police movement, all these mayors pushing to defund the police. It turns out that those same mayors, many of them, were taking taxpayer dollars and hiring their own private security. We're going to go into this, what's been actually happening with that. Also, folks, you might have heard that Larry Elder is now running for mayor in California, but he's now suing because they did not put him on the ballot. And so we'll have to see what happens with this. They're trying to keep him off the ballot, it seems, and he's trying to challenge this. You might notice I cut my hair. It was a mistake, as you can see. It's too short for my liking, but it grows back quickly. But folks, it's always great to see you all here. Again, a lot to go into tonight. As usual, folks, we're on the half-hour mark. We're going to go into some questions. So if you have questions, do leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. And that said, folks, good to see you all. Yeah, Judy Clegg, you said, greetings, everyone. Dade Johnson, nice haircut, Josh. Oh, thank you. I like it longer. I didn't anticipate the guy cutting it so short, to be honest. But, you got to roll with it. You know what I mean? Yeah, clean up well, puff, puff. Thank you. Julie, next. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. You folks like it. I like it. Thank you all. Yeah, appreciate it, folks. Gloria Lenas, thank you. Princeton Phalanx 59 said, hello, everyone. Yeah, folks, you're all great. All right, that's it. Let's jump into the first stories for the night. I want to talk first about what's happening with this whole defund the police movement, because I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about when it comes to, do they really want to get rid of police, or do they want to put something else in place of the police? And it seems to be the latter when it comes to these public officials, because obviously they don't feel safe, it seems, not having police. They want to have some security, and obviously people with guns protecting them, even though they advocate for getting rid of these things. Now, Epoch Times reports here, many big city Democrat mayors defunded police while spending heavily on their security details, according to a new watchdog. It says here, Democratic mayors in 20 of the nation's 25 biggest cities, that's 20 different cities of the 25 biggest, slashed police department budgets and positions, even as they spent millions of taxpayer dollars on their own security details, according to data obtained by a government watchdog. Yet, folks, while your local mayor may be calling to defund the police, they're using your tax dollars to protect themselves after they get rid of the police. Now, it says here, it's a quote. It says, in 25 major U.S. cities, officials have proposed cutting, or in 20 cases already cut, police budgets. However, what OpenTheBooks.com auditors found was that mayors and city officials still enjoy the personal protection of a dedicated police detail, costing taxpayers millions of dollars. Now, it's according to the CEO and founder of Open the Books, and he said this in a statement announcing the new data. Bizarre stuff, folks. As I've been saying, my big concern with this whole defunding the police movement is that these people actually don't believe, the ones pushing it, don't actually believe, I think, that they can be secure without having police. They need to have something else in place. And obviously, we can see that mayors pushing this believe that they need private security when police are defunded, meaning, of course, that they don't feel safe without the police there. And the question, I think, is, and those of you who've heard this before, me say this before, forgive me, but I think it's important to repeat. One of the big questions is, what happens if they actually get rid of them? Because, when you're dealing with socialism, and a lot of them are socialists, right? Even BLM, they're self-avowed trained Marxists. They're talking about instituting Marxism, essentially, right? Even these self-defined Marxists, you can't have a socialist system without an enforcement arm. If it's without enforcement, it's just basically philanthropy. You're basically doing donations. If you want to take people's tax dollars and use those tax dollars to redistribute wealth or whatever, you need an enforcement arm if people refuse to do it. In fact, one of my favorite questions to ask some folks sometimes when I've talked to friends about, friends who believe in socialism, things like this, is, it sounds great, equality, great equality, but what do you do? What do you believe the government should do to me when I refuse? What do you believe the government should do to me when I refuse to give up half my tax dollars? What do you believe the government should do to me when I refuse to go along with these policies? Very quickly, you'll watch these people go from being these bright-eyed young socialists to being gulag-level communists, because the only answer to that is, well, the government should come after you. And the problem you have with this defund the police movement is that these are people basically calling for this type of totalitarian system in some regards, Marxism. They're talking about being trained Marxists in some regards. While at the same time, when they're talking about promoting Marxism, they're talking about getting rid of the enforcement arm that they would actually need to implement those policies. These do not line up. And the big concern, in my opinion, in my analysis, is that one of the issues that totalitarian systems have, if you want to implement totalitarianism in the United States, if you wanted to implement real socialism in the United States, you could take over the government, you could take over the states, you could take over all three branches of the federal government, you could take over everything. But as long as you have sheriffs in place, and those sheriffs are sworn to uphold the Constitution, they're not going to enforce your laws. And so what do you have to do if you want to push this through? You need to get rid of the sheriffs. You need to get rid of the police, who are sworn to uphold the Constitution and would do so, and would refuse to implement many of these policies if they actually went through. That's my big concern when it comes to this, is that they want to get rid of those people, and who knows from there, maybe create a private security branch, maybe federalize it. The federal government can't really reach into the states. Maybe they federalize it. Things like this are what concern me when it comes to the defund the police movement. What is it going to lead to? And now, of course, we do see examples of them, public officials, mayors in this case, who were pushing this, now using taxpayer dollars to make sure that they're safe, right? They're getting rid of the mechanisms to protect the people, their constituents, to protect the people they're supposed to represent, but they're watching their own backs. They're using your money to protect themselves. Now, that said, folks, I've mentioned many times, Crossroads is totally demonetized by YouTube. We do still have a donor box. We do appreciate any donations there. It does help us. We no longer have Patreon. We got rid of it just because Patreon's not really reliable. And of course, we do have EPOCTV, which if you want to support us, that's a great way to do so. But we also do have sponsors, and really it's our sponsors who are helping us quite a bit as well. And tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, we know, again, with all the turbulence in the economy, talks of inflation, Biden saying there won't be inflation, but many economists are warning of serious inflation right around the corner. China waging currency war against the United States, the Biden administration pouring billions of dollars into organizations that are looking to basically globalize the U.S., globalize the currency, essentially, which could undermine the U.S. dollar quite a bit. Chinese Communist Party pushing for this, new digital currencies, you name it. Well, folks, you can consider investing in an asset that's pretty much immune to inflation, typically, and that's gold and silver. Now, American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep or into your IRA. To learn more about them, you can check out the link in the description below. American Hartford Gold has provided us with a 25-page information guide. That's totally free. If you just want to learn about investing in gold, check it out, folks. It's totally free in the description below. Now, if you call them now, you can get up to $1,500 of free silver in all qualifying first orders. The number for that is 877-260-2764. You can also text Joshua to 65532. I have a few bars here. This is a tiny gold bar. These are a couple silver coins. I don't know if you can see that so well. This is actually one of the larger silver bars. I think 10 ounces, I believe. Yeah. And this right here is a gold coin. And so get this, folks. Good investment, good way to make sure that your assets are not, subject to inflation or other things, and generally a pretty stable way to invest. And again, big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring tonight's episode. All right, that said, folks, another story I want to go into is Larry Elder. And you might have heard that Larry Elder, he does a show with Epoch Times, the Larry Elder Show, that he's also running now for California governor. He announced his campaign, and it's an interesting to watch. We'll see what happens with it. But it seems to be the case that someone is interested in making sure that he's not able to run for governor because he was not included on the ballot. Now, Governor Newsom of California is set to be removed from office, pending, of course, what's going to happen in September, I believe, where people are going to vote on whether they actually want to remove him from office and then choose who they want to replace him. Now, Larry Elder is, of course, a pretty strong figure, and he's one of them, but somebody, it seems, either intentionally or unintentionally, refused to put him on the ballot. Epoch Times reports this. Conservative talk radio and Epoch TV host Larry Elder has filed a lawsuit challenging a decision by California's Secretary of State to block him from running in the state's special recall election in September, alleging he's the target of political shenanigans that are dangerous and unconstitutional. Now, Elder, a Republican who on July 12th entered the gubernatorial race to oust incumbent Governor Gavin Newsom, said in a video posted on Twitter on Tuesday that he has filed a lawsuit against California Secretary of State Shirley Weber for failing to put him on the ballot. Despite his campaign's insistence, he has filed every piece of paper required. And Elder said this in a statement. He said, we've complied with everything the Secretary of State has required of us. The politicians in Sacramento, capital of California, know I'm the only candidate who can beat Governor Newsom. They are afraid, and they're using whatever shenanigans they can to try to trip me up. It won't work. Now, we'll see what happens with this. Larry Elder appears to be pretty confident that he's going to get his name on the ballot. And again, their lawsuit is pretty well on track to doing that. Ironically, if they do put him back on the ballot, it's that the press from this is going to be big enough to project him even further. And so this may actually blow up in the face of whoever tried keeping him off the ballot if it was done intentional. We'll have to see. But again, folks, in September, you're going to have the vote to remove Governor Newsom from office. And the possible, well, based on what happens with that, the choice of the new governor of California. Again, Governor Newsom is being recalled right now. And on that note, the same thing may soon happen in Alaska. Epoch Times also reports Alaska Supreme Court approves recall process against their governor. So happened in California. Now it's going to happen in Alaska. And there's a few different states that were talking about doing this, recalling their mayors. It says here, the Alaska Supreme Court ruled on July 16th that the recall campaign against Governor Mike Dunleavy can go forward. A recall committee filed an application to remove the governor, alleging that he's abused his power, neglected his duties, and is unfit for office. The Alaska Division of Elections had denied the application, stating it wasn't legally or factually sufficient. But again, now the Alaska Supreme Court has ruled otherwise, and that's now going through, folks. And so you're going to have another recall election now. Now, let us see where else this happens, because part of this is in response to the COVID lockdowns. And this is one of the interesting phenomena we're watching in this country right now, is that we're seeing a real grassroots movement start up in some regards, where people are taking it on themselves to remove their mayors or governors from office. We saw it in California. Now it just happened in California. You'd normally see this as kind of the most difficult battle for something like that, because California does tend to lean heavily blue. And if a conservative gets in, many of those people may not be happy with it. But of course, most people don't just look at, partisan politics. I'd say a lot of people are moderates, and a lot of people will vote, again, based on policy and based on whether they actually believe the person serving them is doing their job or not. And of course, with the lockdowns, the destruction of businesses, letting prisoners out of prison, legalizing theft, like in California, below a certain amount of money, under $900 something, and the many other lists of problems the states has seen, it seems to have pushed people over the edge in terms of wanting new leadership. And if it can happen in California, folks, it can happen anywhere. Alaska's next on the list, and now that they've succeeded in doing it, you may get to watch it happen in other places as well. There's a process now in place, and again, folks, if it can happen in California, it can happen anywhere. Now, again, folks, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. In about 15 minutes, we'll go over questions. So, again, leave them in the chat if you have questions. I want to go over a few other stories first, though. Now, today is July 20th, and July 20th, 1999 is when the persecution of Falun Gong started in China. The persecution is still ongoing. This is one of the, arguably the most brutal persecution in China, although not to undermine at all the other persecutions against the Muslim Uyghurs, the Inner Mongolians, the Tibetans, people in Hong Kong now, possibly even the CCP expanding beyond its borders to other countries, threatening Taiwan, for example. And not to mention even people in China who believe in Christianity. You have 100 million Christians brutally persecuted. But the persecution of Falun Gong is the model the CCP used to really target other groups when it came to organ harvesting, when it came to other things. Let's go into what's happening right now. Now, Mike Pompeo has now come out, as have many other lawmakers, and he's saying that America needs to lead the world in ending the persecution of Falun Gong. It says here, the United States should help bring an end to the Chinese regime's horrific persecution of Falun Gong so adherents can exercise freedom of belief. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said as Beijing's brutal campaign marks its 22nd year. 22 years of persecution, folks. 100 million people. Pompeo spoke to NTD, a sister media of the Epoch Times, on the eve of the anniversary of the start of the persecution. And he said, with respect to Falun Gong, the absence of religious freedoms in China is horrific. It is tragic. It's gone on for too long, and America needs to lead the world to ensure that those people have the opportunity to practice their faith in the way they want to. It says Falun Gong, a meditation discipline that espouses the values of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, was first introduced in northern China in 1992 and won broad appeal among the Chinese public for its health benefits. However, threatened by its popularity, the Chinese Communist Party launched an eradication campaign targeting Falun Gong on July 20th, 1999, 22 years ago. The entire state apparatus was turned against the practice's adherents, which by official estimates numbered 70 million to 100 million at the time. Practitioners over the past 2 decades have become targets of prolonged imprisonment, slave labor, torture, psychiatric and sexual abuse, and forced organ harvesting for persisting in their faith. In connection with the July 20th anniversary, at least 15 U.S. lawmakers issued letters, proclamations, or video messages to support Falun Gong, as well as an international coalition of politicians from 20 countries. The State Department also called on the Chinese Communist Party to immediately cease its long-running campaign of persecution and release all jailed adherents of Falun Gong. Again, folks, still ongoing. Brutal persecution, I think becoming more well-known now, but really a lot of media in this country have been somewhat complicit in this, either by spreading the lies of the Chinese Communist Party or simply not giving any attention to what is literally a persecution of historic levels. 70 million to 100 million people persecuted in ways that would shock the conscience. I mean, live organ harvesting. The first stories about this were about Falun Gong practitioners. And so, folks, pretty intense stuff, a lot going on. Other news kind of related to China, related to the virus, is that this Delta variant is now spreading. And of course, there's different analysis on how serious this actually is. Let's get into it. Now, Epoch Times reports that this Delta variant is becoming more prevalent as COVID-19 cases rise, and the CDC director is talking about this. It says here, the Delta variant of the pathogen that causes COVID-19 is becoming more prevalent and now accounts for around 83% of all sequenced cases in the United States. 83% of cases, folks. And I'll get into what that means in a bit. And it's according to Dr. Rochelle Walensky, head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. Walensky made the remarks in testimony Tuesday during a Senate hearing on the federal response to the pandemic, which includes tracking down new viral mutations. The CDC has released estimates of various variants across the country and predicted the Delta variant now represents 83% of sequenced cases. And Walensky added, this is a dramatic increase up to 50% the week of July 3rd. Now, on this note, an interesting note on this is that in Israel, actually, they were really leading the charge with vaccinations. In Israel, really, in terms of global numbers, they were arguably, the most prevalent country with getting people vaccinated. And they had vaccine passports. They ended them now. They actually included even offering vaccine passports for people who had the antibodies, meaning you got the virus before, your body developed natural antibodies. You did not get the vaccine. They even recognized that as having a vaccine passport. Israel was very far ahead of the curve on this, but they're now saying that the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is significantly less effective against the Delta variant. That's the Israeli prime minister saying that. So if 83% of cases in the United States are now caused by the Delta variant, and in countries where they were leading the charge with getting vaccinations and saying the vaccinations, at least the Pfizer one, they say, is not really effective against it or significantly less effective. This should I'd say, signals some alarms over the effectiveness over these things, especially when it comes to mutations and possible new mutations in the future. Now, briefly as well, Governor DeSantis in Florida also responded to the number of cases, the new number of cases coming about, and called it a seasonal virus. So he's saying that, well, folks, it's probably going to come about every year. So you're probably going to see an uptick in the virus cases every year. Now, whether that's true or not, we'll have to see. They're talking about the India variant. They're talking about the British variant. They're talking about the South American variant. Many variants, and many more to come, very likely, frankly, as this virus continues to mutate. And as we continues to mutate in ways that it appears already that some of these vaccines may not be able to deal with. The Pfizer vaccine in this case is an example. That said, folks, something else happening right now. I'm sure you're all familiar with Bill Gates and George Soros. It turns out now that their organizations backed by them have now bought out a COVID-19 testing company. And briefly on this, you might remember stories previously of COVID-19 tests. The data from this was allegedly being shared with Chinese Communist Party sources, and Bill Gates was allegedly involved in that. It says here, though, in this news story, a consortium backed by George Soros and Bill Gates has joined a buyout of Mologic, a COVID-19 testing company. The Soros Economic Development Fund, an arm of the Soros' Open Society Foundations, confirmed in a July 19 statement that it has partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Soros-Gates collaboration is part of the Global Access Health Initiative, which will invest at least $41.1 million in the project, according to the statement. The group is this is a quote. It says the group has financed the acquisition of Mologic Ltd., a world-leading innovator of the development of lateral flow and rapid diagnostic techniques, including tests that can help combat tropical diseases such as dengue, bilharzia, and river blindness, as well as for COVID-19, is according to the statement. It notes that the purchase is an attempt to expand access to affordable, state-of-the-art medical technology through decentralized research, development, and manufacturing in developing countries. Now, we'll have to see what this means. You know, one of the issues you had, actually, ironically, soon after Biden came into office, was that the groups that work on the I know you call it like the percentage they base. When you take a test, there's basically a percentage of confirming or denying whether you have the virus. And if you turn it up too high, dengue, thank you, dengue. Just correcting that pronunciation. If you make the test too sensitive, if you increase the sensitivity to the test, you're going to get you're going to get a lot of false positives because it might pick up normal flu symptoms, it might pick up other things. If you turn it down too low, you might, of course, not detect the virus at all. And it seems to be the case, well, it has happened that soon after Biden came into office and after they rolled out the vaccination thing, they changed the criteria to measure the assuredness of whether or not you have the virus, basically. And they made it so that basically it was more they turned it up higher. So you had to have a higher threshold. Yeah, thank you. It's called threshold. You have to have a higher threshold stating that you have the virus in order to be confirmed as having had it. Meaning that, of course, if you increase the threshold, the numbers of cases are automatically going to go down. And it makes whoever's in office look better. Now, whether they did this intentionally or not, we'll have to see. But if you have organizations now that want to use this, for example, for, let's say, an election cycle, for example, the 2022 elections right around the corner, and you want to make it look like there's a crisis and looks like the cases are on the rise again, you can do it. Of course, you need oversight to make sure that things like this don't happen. You need to have oversight to make sure, for example, that people don't manipulate this. But this is, of course, one of the concerns with this. If you have private companies or whatever, basically manipulating or able to manipulate the numbers that can be used by politicians for things like lockdowns, for mask mandates, for changing election laws, for example. And so this is something important to watch out for. Now, a couple more notes on this. Briefly as well, the tea tonight is ginseng tea with a bit of honey. Actually, ginseng tea is my personal favorite. It's wonderful. Now, a couple more stories on this. Interesting development took place. You may remember in Texas that they were basically going to create new, stronger election laws in Texas. A few of the Democrats there fled the state so that they could not actually vote to pass the law. The Democrats would not have had the votes to block it. And so they took this more extreme measure. They fled the state. They went to Washington, met with top-level Biden administration officials, even including Kamala Harris, right? Even including Kamala Harris, and the rest is history, right? They're blocking it from being passed. But it turns out that some of those Democrats who fled the state of Texas, actually, it seems to be the case, were infected with COVID-19. And they've now been spreading it among some folks in Washington on the Democrat side. Briefly on this, a Pelosi aide, a White House official, and a 6th Texas Democrat have now tested positive for COVID-19 in a widening number of cases like this. And so we'll have to see what happens with it. But this is what's happening right now. Now, on another note, the White House now appears to be encouraging media organizations, and the Biden administration is encouraging different social media platforms to help them push their narratives when it comes to the virus. There appears to be the case, allegedly encouraging media to push their narratives, and they're also encouraging social media organizations to begin censoring. Briefly on this, Psaki, the White House press secretary, said that the White House has reached out to media outlets about COVID-19 vaccinations. In North Carolina, briefly, they have a door-to-door vaccine outreach. It's now being said to violate zone of privacy laws. According to an advocacy group, you might remember the Biden administration is trying to do this door-to-door thing. In North Carolina, they're doing this, and they're now saying it violates one of the laws there. Expect this to continue as they try this in other states. And the the Surgeon General is now saying that Facebook's efforts to combat alleged COVID-19 quote-unquote misinformation is not enough. That's a quote. They're encouraging censorship. Let's go into this article now talking about this. It says here, continuing a public feud with Facebook over whether the company is addressing alleged misinformation about COVID-19, like you folks talking about whether or not you want to get the virus. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy said on July 18th that Facebook hasn't done enough to remove such misinformation from its platform. And he said it's not enough. He told this to Fox News about Facebook, stating, misinformation is still spreading. And he said social media companies have to move to stop it. He said, quote, we are still, despite some of the actions they have taken, seeing significant spread of misinformation. This health misinformation is hurting people's health. It's costing them their lives. I'm asking these companies to step up and take responsibility for what's happening on their sides. Now, first of all, folks, how many official narratives from the World Health Organization, from Dr. Fauci himself, from media organizations and so on, that they said was absolute truth, proven science, don't dare question it, proved to be false later on? Like, for example, suggesting the virus may have leaked out of a Chinese laboratory. How'd that narrative turn out? Like, for example, talking about possible remedies to the virus. Hydroxychloroquine, for example. How'd that turn out? Like, for example, talking about every narrative the Chinese Communist Party told the World Health Organization that turned out to be lies. And then the World Health Organization worked together with the Chinese Communist Party to launch a fake investigation into the origin of the virus, where the CCP literally handed them information, and the World Health Organization went along with it and claimed they investigated it. Where did these narratives that started off as unquestionable truth end up at, right? This is the problem we have when it comes to, quote unquote misinformation, is who's defining the boundaries of what can or cannot be said. Sometimes it turns out that the misinformation, or things called misinformation, are true. And sometimes it turns out that the thing that the government is pushing, or initially pushing, or media organizations or otherwise are pushing, turns out to be false. And if people aren't allowed to debate the facts, they're not allowed to have real discussions about information, where does that wind up at, especially when you're dealing with something that does have to do with public health, and especially your choice of whether or not you want to put something in your body in this case. Now, on this note, this may blow up in some of these social media companies' faces, because, one of the ways that they were able to defend themselves previously against allegations that, they're violating the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, your protections on free speech, by censoring, is that, well, they're private companies, and private companies can say or do whatever they want, and that's their freedom of speech. They don't have to have things on their platform if they don't want them there. If you're a media organization, you don't have to run an op-ed if you don't want it, right? You have a choice. Now, of course, that's based on kind of a funny premise, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which there's actually some cases on that now. We can see if we get into it. When it comes to the Communications Decency Act, arguing that they don't have the capability to censor so that they basically can't be sued for defamation or other things. Well, the problem you have going back to the issue of whether these companies are violating the First Amendment is that if the government is encouraging them to censor, if the government is pushing for the censorship, if the government is involved in the censorship, then it's no longer free, independent companies censoring. It is government censorship through the medium of these companies. In other words, it's organizations working as the sock puppets of government action. And then, yes, it may violate the First Amendment. Yes, then it may violate your free speech. And there's now a case on this. Epoch Times reports Facebook, White House, colluding on censorship, according to a lawsuit. And it says here, Facebook is censoring Americans at the behest of President Joe Biden's administration in violation of the First Amendment, a new lawsuit alleges. As evidence of the collusion, the class action complaint quotes White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki's recent admission that the administration, the Biden administration, is, quote, flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation. And said as well, this is according to the plaintiff, Richard Rogalinsky, telling Epoch Times, quote, when she said that they were working with big tech, then it changes everything, because then it's the government censoring. So that obviously can't stand. Now, to see where this goes, the Supreme Court will act with this. But of course, this opens many doors of concern, because we've seen already that this hasn't just affected things about COVID-19 or the CCP virus. This hasn't just affected narratives about the vaccine. This hasn't just affected whether we can talk about possible origins of the virus. It's also affected voting laws. It's also affected things that directly fit in with the interests of many politicians. And if politicians are trying to shut down discussions on things that may challenge their own personal interests, which we have seen some cases of this in regards to this. Dr. Shiva, of course, has another case against Twitter, I believe, where he's found some evidence like this. Then it becomes something much bigger. Then it becomes a much bigger issue. It's government trying to censor you, essentially, trying to censor legitimate debate under the narrative of disinformation or misinformation, using the proxy, the medium, of a private company to do so, to do things that they don't have the legal rights to do. But whether or not this will stand in court, we'll have to see. There's now a lawsuit on it. We'll have to see where this goes. All right, folks. That said, let's go into some questions for the night, and then we'll go into some more stories. Again, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. First, though, folks, again, I've mentioned before, we're demonetized by YouTube. We don't have Super Chat. We don't have ads. We luckily do have sponsors. We do have donor box still if you want to donate to this channel. We also have Epoch TV. And folks, you can get Crossroads on Epoch TV. You can get a lot of other channels there. Danielle D'Souza, Dinesh D'Souza's daughter, just started a show with us. Sam Sorbo, Kevin Sorbo, remember Hercules, his wife. She just started a show with us about homeschooling or home education. Highly recommend them. You can check it out, folks. A lot of great channels there. I think you'll like it. Larry Elder has a show there, many others. And folks, we show you a quick trailer of what we're working on over there. We have some good stuff in the works. Again, that's EPOCTV.com/Crossroads. EPOCTV.com/Crossroads. Check it out. Great shows on there. Tiffany Meyer's on there. Roman Belmakov, the Epoch Times ad guy's on there. All kinds of stuff, folks. Some great shows and more to come. All right, we'll show you a quick trailer now of what we're working on over there.
You know, we're raising a generation of what I call unproductive narcissists. You know, they're unproductive because we're not expecting them to do anything, and they're narcissists because we don't let them fail. We've taken these things out of the lives of boys, and we've almost given them something that I don't really know what to do. And so where do they go? They go to video games, because there they can compete, they can win, they can get better, they can fail, and work at it harder, and they can have success there. And the world, it's participation trophies, or that they're not allowed to win, or not allowed to play too hard. And so boys are giving up in the world. And so we're setting again in front of boys, there is something for you to do. There's a world out there to conquer. We're teaching boys that trying something really difficult and failing at it, that's not the end. You get to get back up the next day and try harder. Make your adjustments. That's a huge life lesson.
All right, folks, again, that's EPOCTV.com/Crossroad. That's our uncensored video platform. Of course, I mentioned before that Crossroads now is live there as well. So if you want to watch us there, please do so. We do have the live chat up and working again. We got the issues sorted out. Should be working fine now. We, of course, just built this, and we're going to expand it quite a bit from here. A lot in the works, a lot to announce coming soon. We also have my America Rewritten documentary that just came out over there as well. You can also use your email if you want to try it out. You can get a free trial. So if you want to just watch the documentary, all you need is an email. Check it out for a free trial. All right, that said, folks, let's jump into some questions for the night. And again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. First question here is from the one and only Pinky. Good to see you here as always. He said, how do U.S. citizens keep the government from seeing our private messages? I'll go into that. How can we sue the government from having our private medical records? Wow. Okay, folks, I'll let you in on something unfortunate, which is really there's not a whole lot of ways you can. There are some pretty secure chat platforms, and really, unless you're talking about something really serious like carrying out crimes or terrorism, typically the government's not going to go after you. Typically, there is a process they need to go through to get the data, but the reality is that pretty much everything is subject to government monitoring if they want to access it. If not even government monitoring, then private company monitoring, because chances are on your cell phone you've installed many different apps, which you've very likely given access to things like key logging, to things like your camera, to your microphone, to many other forms of data that they can use all the same to monitor you. And we have seen cases, for example, of governments just buying that data. Even of some of these big tech companies selling the data to companies like Baidu, China's search engine. And if you're selling it to China's search engine under the national security law in China, the government gets the data. So, I don't know, use an air gap, don't use a cell phone. Your options are pretty limited, to be honest. We actually do have another advertiser we've done some episodes with, which is actually probably pretty safe with this. That's Secure, SEKUR. They're based in Sweden. They're based in Sweden, SEKUR. They just launched a chat platform. Again, but the important part is they're based in Sweden, and I'm not saying this is an ad right now. This is just for your question. But again, I don't choose advertisers haphazardly. I believe if I choose one, it's because I think they actually have legit stuff. The problem we have in the U.S. is the Cloud Act, and basically what the Cloud Act is, it's an act that basically lets the government access data in the cloud, i.e., the internet, and most big tech companies work with them. And so if you have any kind of American technology in your device, in your program, they can monitor it. And other countries have this too. It's not just the United States. Switzerland is one of the exceptions to this because they have the Swiss banking system, things like this. There's a much tougher legal process to get this type of data. The one exception with that would be if you had a Swiss company that used, for example, a U.S. foundational technology from Amazon or Microsoft or something like that, which most open source programs use, then it's going to be subject to monitoring. Secure doesn't do that. They're built from the ground up, and so they're not subject to that. Typically, as long as you're not seriously violating any laws, you're going to be okay. So keep that in mind. But realistically, there aren't many platforms that would keep you totally protected from any kind of monitoring. My recommendation, don't install a ton of apps on your phone. Be wary of any kind of Chinese app, especially. Be wary of big social networks, because how do you think they make their money, folks? It's not by selling you a subscription. It's by selling your data to other people. So you let them in, they're monitoring your stuff. It's as simple as that. So the unfortunate reality of your privacy. Another question here: how can we sue the government from having our private medical records? Well, you could try suing them. So this goes into the question I believe you're referring to, of the Biden administration talking about doing this door-to-door process, going and knocking on doors and encouraging people to get vaccinated. This started a whole argument in the United States over, well, are they going to be targeting people who aren't vaccinated, and would the government know this? I mentioned there was a very important technical wording that they used when they announced this. They said the government does not have or maintain a database of U.S. medical records, of your medical records. But not having and not maintaining your medical records or a database of it doesn't mean they could not access your medical records from a private company that may own them. And they didn't state that. I'd actually like to hear them say that they won't access your medical data in doing this, because they did not state that. It's subtle wording sometimes you have to pay attention to. So fine, the government does not personally have a database. The government has no intention of managing a database. They don't have one, they say. But until they say that they will not access a database to do operations like this, it remains a concern. And so we haven't yet heard them say that. And I believe that's what you're concerned about in this comment. We'll have to see the legalities of this going forward as well. Typically you're supposed to have protection, right, under HIPAA again. Another question here. This is from Did We Get the Baby? He said, "Hi, Josh. Do you think there should be forensic audits in all 50 states to achieve real election reform and restore integrity of our elections? Absolutely. I believe there should be forensic audits in every single state. Because, again, I think it's necessary. Let's put it this way. One thing that the Democrats did, mostly Democrats, there have been some Republicans as well, most of what they did during the 2020 elections was they loosened the standards on the elections. They loosened the laws. They made things that were normally illegal, legal. They changed the election laws. And they used the virus heavily to do so. Now, they did so under the narrative that we'd still have secure elections, that having free and open access to vote does still ensure free elections. But if you're going to change the election standards, if you're going to weaken the laws and still claim that it works, I think you need to prove to people that it works. And so, yes, even if they just want to prove that lightening the standards works and restore Americans' trust in their election system, yes, absolutely, we should have audits in all 50 states, let alone the possibility, which seems to be becoming increasingly the case, that they cheated. As we're seeing now with the Arizona audit, some of the information coming out there, although the local officials deny it. I think it's becoming incredibly necessary, extremely necessary. Again, aside from possibly finding fraud, just restoring Americans' trust in the election systems should be part of this. And especially if the Biden administration is concerned about insurgency or domestic terrorism, as they claim they are, a lot of those fears that they're noting are people who believe that the election was stolen. So what better way to reassure people and eliminate the possibility of people doing something like that than just opening the books and showing them, of proving it. Frankly, I think for the sake of this country and for the sake of restoring people's faith in the election system after officials weakened our system and changed election laws, and even for national security, if they actually believe this is a threat, absolutely they should hold the audits. And it's actually surprising, I think, that people who would want to prove that there was no fraud or anything like that would try to block audits like this from taking place. Another question here is from Denise Coop. And hey, good to see you again. Good to see you as always. He said, lately there have been a lot of sites popping up with some popular YouTubers saying Falun Gong is a cult and all sorts of derogatory things. What can I say to this? Well, basically what happened. Okay, going back to the story of Falun Gong in China. Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa, was the most popular meditation practice in China. 170 million to 100 million people practicing. Basically, it's a Qigong practice. And so Qigong is like kind of like Tai Chi or like Chinese yoga or something like that. But it has a process of moral refinement and character refinement. People practice truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. always free to be taught. There's no churches or temples or anything like that. People practice it in parks and make an effort to improve themselves. When the Chinese Communist Party launched its persecution in 1999, so Jiang Zemin, the head of the Chinese Communist Party at the time, called for the persecution to happen. He was the only member of the Politburo Standing Committee, the main body of the CCP, that wanted to do that, because everyone else was saying, why would you want to persecute Falun Gong? It's like, why would you want to persecute yoga, people practicing yoga is kind of how you could frame it in this country. Why would you want to persecute people for playing soccer or something like that? It's kind of the analogy of it in the Chinese context, because it was a Qigong practice. A lot of Chinese people go to the parks in the morning and practice Qigong of one form or another. This just happened to be the most popular one. Jiang Zemin said, well, find a reason to persecute it. Prove it's a cult. They came back and said, no, it's not a cult. Not only that, but it's actually beneficial to the country. Because again, it's improving the health of the population. It's making the society more harmonious. People are becoming better people. Why would you want to persecute it? He said, persecute it anyway. And so what they did was they manufactured disinformation, real disinformation, defamed the practice, spread lies all throughout China, used the media to broadcast it 24/7. And then what happened? All the Western media repeated those lies. And so you had a field of lies about Falun Gong spreading all around the world, while 100 million people, well, 70 million to 100 million people, were facing things like torture, re-education through labor, slavery, sexual torture. I mean, horrifying stories, murder, people dying in custody, and of course, live organ harvesting. And the world turned a blind eye to it, because not only were they not reporting on the abuses, but they were helping the CCP spread this disinformation. If you see YouTubers talking about this, very likely they're doing it for one of two reasons. Either they're taking money from the Chinese Communist Party, or they've been misinformed by many of the media around the world, very likely here in the United States, because, well, Epoch Times was founded by Falun Gong practitioners, frankly. People who escaped persecution in China. And of course, as media organizations have attacked Epoch Times, they've tried to go after Falun Gong, attacking, ironically, the religious belief of people in order to try to defame the media when they can't actually find legitimate reasons to defame it. And so that's how it happened, basically. And so you have people doing it for political reasons, because, they're like, oh, Epoch Times, I don't like them or whatever. And that's just a way they can attack us. Or because they're getting paid by the Chinese Communist Party to do so. But I will say, folks, that the persecution of Falun Gong will, I think, come to light one day. And when that happens, you're going to watch something on par with the Nuremberg trials. This is 100 million people. Not only that, you have to imagine how many of these people have friends or family members, how many people have sons or daughters or mothers or fathers, or probably every one of them, right? This is a persecution that affected just about every single person in the country, in China. Not a single person didn't know someone or have a family member who practiced Falun Gong. And so this persecution affected everybody. What happens now when the persecution comes to an end, and when there is the comeuppance, so to speak, from it, and all the media organizations, all the businesses, all the officials who were engaged in it need to face justice? Well, folks, it's going to be very interesting to watch, to say the least. And so I would say to people who are spreading lies about Falun Gong that, I'd say either research it a bit more and don't just read mainstream media, because they're lying about it more often than not. But at the same time, I'd say consider what you're doing, because the truth's going to come out eventually. Let's put it that way. Another question here is from CJ Kramer. And then after this, we'll go into some more stories. He said, we'll go into some stories about the election investigations after this, actually. This is from CJ Kramer. Says, has the current administration said anything at all against the CCP genocide of the Falun Gong practice? Anything? And will there ever be consequences for Biden's family peddling $9 billion through Hunter? Can that be prosecuted? Actually, Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, has criticized the CCP for persecuting Falun Gong, which has been nice to see. He actually has maintained some of the Trump era stances against the CCP's human rights abuses. A lot of that started with Mike Pompeo. In fact, I think Pompeo under Trump was the first high-level U.S. official to really go after the CCP on this. There have been CCP officials already sanctioned for their involvement in the persecution. You've actually even had bipartisan resolutions in the United States, Democrats and Republicans, oftentimes unanimous, condemning the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong, including of the organ harvesting. And so there actually has been a lot of action on that. Unfortunately, though, the media hasn't really reported on a lot of this. And so I would say the media, for one reason or another, is choosing to not do so. A lot of the media. The other question he had is about Hunter Biden and his very large business deals with Chinese companies. Can they be prosecuted? It's complicated. It's kind of a loophole within our system where friends or family members having their own business deals with other countries doesn't always reflect on the public officials. There have been a lot of cases like this in the United States, and it's actually very common where friends or family members, more often than not, of public officials do have deals that tend to overlap pretty heavily with what their spouses or family members are working on in government. And so will there ever be anything done about this? I'm personally not optimistic, but we'll have to see. All right, folks, that said, let's go into some more stories. I want to talk about what's happening with the election investigations. So first story here is about Arizona. And of course, Arizona is now wrapping up its audit. And many other states, 18 of them at least, are considering in some degree or another, maybe having their own audits. It says here, Arizona Senate President states 11 electors cannot be recalled after the Maricopa County audit. And we'll have to see whether this actually holds up. Let's go into it. It says here, Arizona Senate President Karen Fann, a Republican, said the state Senate doesn't have the ability to recall electors for the November 3rd, 2020 election after a fellow Republican lawmaker called for new elections. Fann told One American News Network, OANN, which has been covering the audit of Maricopa County, that the upper chamber has the ability to provide auditors with the materials they need, including through the use of subpoenas, but the certification of electors is a different matter. And this is a quote. It says, the Senate body, we do not have the authority to do that. So this is what we have said. And I want to make this very clear on the record, the Republican state leader said on July 16th. Fann's comments came as former President Donald Trump, however, issued a statement declaring that the audit revealed there were irregularities and fraud that would have swayed the election in his favor last year. On July 15th, in other words, Trump believes that maybe he would have won Arizona had there not been these issues. On July 15th, the Senate held a hearing in the midst of the months-long review carried out by Florida-based tech firm Cyber Ninjas, and teams told lawmakers they discovered discrepancies. We're still waiting on the report from that. As that comes out, we will be covering it here, so stay tuned. They said that once they finish the audit, it's still ongoing in Arizona. They're still working on some things. They're still waiting for some information to come to them. They haven't yet been given. But once that's completed, it may take weeks or even months, they're now saying, to get the report out. And so we'll see, folks, but I'll keep you updated on it. Now, guess what else is happening? A Texas representative has introduced a bill to audit 13 of the most populous counties' election results. So, folks, it's spreading. I'll go into a couple others here, but it's spreading, folks. It says here, a Texas House representative announced Monday he's introducing a bill for a forensic audit of the most populous counties' election results, according to the text of House Bill 241, introduced by Republican State Representative Steve Toth. Forensic reviews of counties with more than 415,000 population should be carried out before November 1st, 2021, and they should be completed before February 1st, 2022. Not later than March 1st, 2022, the bill text states. In other words, in time for the 2022 elections, folks. There's a quote, it says here, the independent third party conducting the audit under these sections shall submit a report to the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker of the House of Representatives, and each member of the legislature detailing any anomalies or discrepancies in voter data, ballot data, or tabulation. I'll have to see what happens with it, but it got passed in Arizona, similar political makeup to Texas in some regards, and we'll have to see what happens with it, folks. On that note, again, guess what else is happening? in Georgia, it says Speaker of Georgia House urges Fulton County to request independent forensic probe into the 2020 elections. And Fulton County is where in Georgia you had a lot of the concerns about issues like this. And some information has been coming out of it as well, which we've been covering. It says here, Georgia's House Speaker says Fulton County should be subject to an independent probe after multiple reports have emerged detailing alleged issues with the November 3rd, 2020 elections and an audit that occurred after the contest. Representative David Ralston, a Republican who is Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives, noted in a recent letter that there are serious questions about how the election unfolded in Georgia's largest county, which includes Atlanta. And said this, quote, recently, media reports have surfaced which call into question the way in which Fulton County conducted, counted, and audited the November 2020 presidential election. And it's been breaking at the seams, folks, in terms of the stories coming out on this. It says these reports have been accompanied by video and other evidence, which is part of ongoing litigation and requires thorough examination and explanation. Ralston told Fulton County's election director, Richard Barron, and said this as well. Given the seriousness of the situation and the possible repercussions for our state and nation, it is time we have an independent investigation once and for all of the way in which Fulton County conducted, counted, and audited the November 2020 presidential election. And folks, an important part on this, you're going to watch who votes for it and watch who votes against it. Pay attention to this. Look at these different states, look at the politicians, and keep tabs of the ones who vote for it and vote against it. Because very likely you're going to watch this impact their ability to get reelected, I would say. It's going to be interesting to watch, folks, and especially as more evidence and more information comes up of results from the audits. We can pay attention to this. As more evidence comes out from actual audits and as they find things, and this is shown to the public, people are going to start demanding similar audits. And if local officials, regardless of the evidence presented to them, still continue to block it, that's going to say a lot. So keep an eye out for this. This is where the debate is going to be heading. Now, in addition to this, we have it happening as well in Georgia, something interesting. A judge has dismissed a lawsuit attempting to overturn the Senate elections there. It says here, a Georgia judge on Monday dismissed a lawsuit seeking to overturn the results of the state's two Senate runoff elections in January, rejecting a case brought by a Fulton County resident. Now, the plaintiff, Michael Dougherty, alleged the two January runoff contests, which were won by then Democrat candidates Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, were fraught with irregularities and misconduct. As a result, he argued the twin elections should be redone with paper ballots instead. Similar to the call happening in Arizona, which they say they're not able to do directly through the government level, but we'll have to see what happens with this. At the very least, the momentum of this, is pushing for the audits, and the audits can prove more factually and more accurately whether there were in fact irregularities, and especially enough irregularities to have affected the outcome of the elections. And on this note, folks, again, in Pennsylvania, guess what's happening? A second Pennsylvania county is now raising objections to a senator's election investigation. And again, folks, pay attention to who's pushing back. It says here, officials in a Pennsylvania county say a state senator may not have the legal power to compel it to provide election-related materials, such as forensic images of ballot tabulators and voter information. Commissioners in York County, in a recent letter obtained by the Epoch Times, told Pennsylvania Senator Jug Mastriano, a Republican, that the panel that he chairs, the Senate Intergovernmental Operations Committee, may lack jurisdiction of election oversight. Mastriano triggered a forensic investigation of the 2020 election in York, Tioga, and Philadelphia counties on July 7th, requesting reams of information from county officials. He said he had the authority as chairman of the panel to do so. Now, if they're saying he doesn't have the authority to do that, we can expect the same standards to happen in other areas when, for example, people of other maybe political leanings are requesting similar data from other areas. It's going to be an interesting question in terms of, well, can they move forward with the investigations? And I think the bigger picture here, in my analysis, is whether their calls for the investigations, regardless of whether they can go through or not, can create enough noise to actually push through people actually, well, passing an election audit. This is different from a full audit. This is being pushed by a committee. But again, if you have officials in these local counties blocking this from happening, this may actually push these officials to push through bills or legislation to enact an audit, and a full audit. In other words, this isn't going to stop it from happening. Very likely, instead, it's going to start more of a public debate on this. And as they get more people on the grassroots level, voters and constituents, pushing their local officials to have an audit, you're going to have a much stronger chance of doing so. And so, regardless of the pushback, unless there's a full audit being rejected, actually the actions and even pushback on that is going to increasingly create the case, I believe, in my analysis, of actually getting audits in these areas. And again, you do have many areas calling for this right now. There's lots of talk about this. And especially as evidence comes out, based on what they find, we can expect more states to call for them or decide not to call for them, depending, again, what the results of the audits are. All right, folks, that said, it's getting late, so I'll call it a night. It's always a pleasure. And again, folks, even though we are demonetized and, well, the growth of the channel basically froze, it still helps us quite a bit if you do like and subscribe to this channel. If you like what you see, please consider subscribing. If you want to help us grow, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member, especially our new platform, Epoch TV. That's EPOCHTV.com/Crossroads. Epoch TV is the future of Crossroads and hopefully the future of video news in general. We have a lot of programs coming up. And again, if you haven't checked out the documentary I did, America Rewritten, check it out. If you don't have an Epoch TV account, you can get a free trial. All you need is your email address. So check it out, folks. Again, that's epochtv.com, EPOCHTV.com/Crossroads. That said, folks, appreciate you all. Always enjoy doing these. And as always, folks, again, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. The American story was once seen as a light of strength and freedom for the world. It created a government by the people and for the people, where rights were given not by leaders, but by God. Yet now the very fabric of the nation is under assault.
Without us, I don't think you'd have free market capitalism. I can't think where it exists in its essence anywhere else.
I think the American idea is forward-looking, it's optimistic, it's the idea that children will live better than their parents.
The Constitution mostly is a guarantee of what government cannot do.
If we lose the Constitution, we lose our liberty, we lose our prosperity, we lose our way of life, and the world loses because the world has been depending on us for a half century.
So every tyrant in America right now, from the radical left to the globalists to big tech to the Communist Party of China, are all trying to destroy the US Constitution. Because if they can do that, they have complete power over every aspect of our lives. That's their dream, and that's our nightmare.
What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost?